than any money spent illegitimately on overhead to pay the salary of a professor in the humanities department at a university is coming out of her research. And it's not wrong to ask questions.
It is not wrong to ask
No,
questions.
it's not.
Not at all. And Senator, I think it's actually important to ask those questions and optimize the system.
And I don't understand why these universities cannot live on 15% overhead when Gates Foundation limits them to 10% and the Johnson Foundation limits them to 12%. Yes. I don't understand it. All of a sudden, if they don't get 35% overhead, civilization is going to melt.
It is important.
My mama didn't raise a fool, and if she did, it was one of my brothers. I'm not buying that.
Senator,
thank you.
I think it's worth the conversation.
The time has expired.
I went way over. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I appreciate your indulgence.
Hey there, Patriots. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, follow and subscribe. And today we're diving into a very important topic. Government spending, specifically the outrageous amount of taxpayer money going to university overhead costs. And yes, this issue was brought to light by none other than Senator John Kennedy, one of the few straight-shooting, no-nonsense lawmakers in Washington. We're going to take a deep dive into his exchange with Dr. Parikh, a representative from the National Institutes of Health, and let me tell you folks, it's a conversation that needs to be heard by every single American who cares about accountability, transparency, and ensuring that hard-earned taxpayer dollars aren't being thrown away. Boom. Right out of the gate, Senator Kennedy nails it. He's asking the tough questions, and frankly, it's about time someone in Washington calls out this wasteful spending. Look, I'm all for funding biomedical research. Who isn't? But we have to make sure that our money isn't being flushed down the drain in the name of overhead costs. These so-called administrative expenses are absolutely out of control, and Senator Kennedy isn't afraid to confront it.
Dr. Parikh, am I saying that right?
You are.
Thank you. Do you know anybody who's against biomedical research?
I do not know anybody that's against biomedical research, but I know some.
That's like being against children, isn't it?
It is.
It's like being against world peace, isn't it?
It is.
It's like being against golden retrievers, isn't it?
There's some people that argue there.
Okay. Well, let's get that out of the way. I want to ask you about NIH. I love NIH. I think they do extraordinary work.
Yes, sir.
But isn't it a fact if NIH assigns way too much money for overhead, that money comes out of the basic research? Isn't that the case?
Senator, both those things are providing funds for research. And I agree with you that we need to make the administrative burden and the costs associated with it as low as possible, because we do want as much to go to research.
Well, why can't NIH live with 15% overhead?
Yeah. Senator, we have had a partnership that's been going on for 75 years in this country.
Yes, sir, but why can't NIH live with 15% overhead?
At this point, what that would do is actually turn institutions like the ones we've heard about here, it would actually make it to where they are laying off researchers and the support folks who are
Well, the Gates Foundation, when they make grants, they limit overhead to 10%, don't they?
They do, sir, but that is apples to oranges because they count different things.
And the Roberts Woods Johnson Foundation limits overhead to 12%, don't they?
They do. Again, apples to oranges because they count different things.
Isn't it a fact that the universities that receive the most money from NIH also have the biggest endowments?
I haven't checked that, but it probably is true, Senator. And I agree with you. There are challenges that we need to work on.
Well, let's take Harvard. 69 cents out of every dollar from NIH given to Harvard goes to overhead.
No, sir, it's 69 cents out of every $1.69. It's on top of, it's not within.
Okay.
Which is 1.6.
Let me ask you about one of the worst abuses I've ever seen. It was at Stanford.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Stanford was spending 74% of grants from NIH on overhead. Remember that?
I do, although I was in high school at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't. and they audited Stanford.
Yes, sir.
You remember what they found?
They bought a sailboat.
They found that Stanford was spending some of that money to pay the salaries of the employees at a Stanford-owned shopping center, didn't they?
I don't remember that part.
I do.
But yeah, okay.
They found that Stanford was spending some of that money that was supposed to go to research, ladies and gentlemen, to renovate the president's home,
Yes, sir.
didn't they?
I believe so, Senator. Again.
And to renovate the vice provost's home, too, didn't they?
I believe you when you say that. Yes.
And they also charged, Stanford took NIH research money to help children and applied it to depreciation on a Stanford yacht, didn't they?
Yes, sir. Again, when I was in high school, sir.
Now, does NIH audit every year the way these grants are being spent?
They don't audit every year. There's a process for
So
determining.
they just trust the universities?
No, there's a negotiation that takes place between
Yes,
the
sir,
NIH
but if it's a
and the
5-year grant
university. Yes, sir.
and they agree on indirect costs, they don't audit it every year. What if the universities lie to them?
That is absolutely a possibility.
What does fungible mean?
Fungible means that you can move money from one place to another.
And money's fungible, isn't it?
Money is fungible.
I'm ready to have a productive discussion. I've got to go to another committee. Maybe you'll have it today. I haven't heard it.
Yes, sir.
What I've heard is the implication is that anybody who is against asking hard questions about the overhead and spending is against biomedical research.
I wouldn't say that, sir. I think you are a champion.
And I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I don't either.
But every penny that we spend on overhead that's not being audited, and you know as much as I do, Doc, that some of it is being abused, is money that is taken away from research. And that's just a fact.
Senator,
And if you care about this child here, and I know you do, we all do, then any money spent illegitimately on overhead to pay the salary of a professor in the humanities department at a university is coming out of her research. And it's not wrong to ask questions.
it is not wrong to ask
No,
questions.
it's not.
Not at all. And Senator, I think it's actually important to ask those questions and optimize the system.
And I don't understand why these universities cannot live on 15% overhead when Gates Foundation limits them to 10% and the Johnson Foundation limits them to 12%.
Yes.
I don't understand it. All of a sudden, if they don't get 35% overhead, civilization is going to melt.
It is important.
My
to
mama
have that
didn't raise a fool, and if she did, it was one of my brothers. I'm not buying that.
Senator,
Thank you.
I think it's worth the conversation.
The time has expired.
I went way over. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I appreciate your indulgence.
At this point, what that would do is actually turn institutions like the ones we've heard about here. It would actually make it to where they are laying off researchers and the support folks who are. Hold up. Dr. Parikh says that reducing the overhead percentage would make institutions lay off researchers. Well, let's be real here. If these universities can't operate on 15% overhead, then maybe they're just bloated with too many unnecessary staff or inefficient operations. I mean, the Gates Foundation and the Johnson Foundation, both of which fund biomedical research, they operate with much lower overhead rates, 10% and 12% respectively. Are we really supposed to believe that universities with massive endowments like Harvard and Stanford need to take more than 50% of the NIH funding for overhead? Look at this, folks. The Gates Foundation and the Johnson Foundation managed to keep their overhead costs under 15%. Meanwhile, some of the wealthiest universities in America, ones that already have billions in their endowments, are claiming that they can't survive unless they take 40%, 50%, or even more of the funding for administrative costs. This is where the red flags should be waving, people. Isn't it a fact that Stanford was spending 74% of grants from NIH on overhead? Do you remember that? Stanford was spending some of that money to pay the salaries of employees at a Stanford-owned shopping center, didn't they? Wow. Just wow. Now we're getting into the real meat of the problem. Stanford spent 74% of NIH grants on overhead. And let's not forget what they did with some of that money, paying for a sailboat and even renovating the president's home. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a university that's putting the research first. It sounds like a university that's taking advantage of taxpayers and using government funds for luxuries. If you're a hardworking American taxpayer, you should be furious at this kind of wasteful spending. Negotiation? Really? This is exactly what's wrong with government funding. They don't audit every year, and there's a process for negotiating these costs. It's like the honor system with billions of dollars at stake. You trust these institutions to be transparent and honest, but who's watching them? What happens when they lie? Who's held accountable? Let's face it, folks, this is a recipe for abuse and corruption. And the worst part? The money that's wasted on all these so-called overhead costs is money that could have gone toward actual research. Research that could save lives, develop new medicines, and advance science in ways we can only dream of. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, but we need to fund research. We can't cut back on overhead. Well, that's exactly what the left wants you to believe. They want you to feel guilty for even questioning the status quo. They want you to think that if you question the spending, you're somehow against research and progress. But let me tell you, questioning wasteful spending isn't anti-research, it's pro-accountability. We shouldn't allow the elites at these universities to keep taking advantage of taxpayer dollars without consequence. As patriots, we should demand transparency and accountability. Our tax dollars are being taken from hardworking Americans every single day. We have a right to know where that money is going and to make sure it's being spent efficiently and responsibly. Every penny that we spend on overhead that's not being audited, and you know as much as I do, Doc, that some of it is being abused, is money that is taken away from research. And that, my friends, is the hard truth. When money is mismanaged, it's not just going to waste, it's actively stealing from the future. Every penny spent on misused overhead is a penny not spent on developing new life-saving cures or advancing critical medical technologies. It's a travesty, and it's high time we hold these institutions accountable. Here's the bottom line. We need to stop letting these universities and research institutions off the hook. They need to be held to the same standards as any other business or organization that relies on public funds. Overhead costs should be capped, audits should be mandatory, and any institution caught misusing taxpayer money should face serious consequences. As patriots, we owe it to our country, our families, and future generations to demand better. Senator Kennedy is asking the right questions, and it's time we, as Americans, stand behind him. Let's take action, let's hold these elites accountable, and let's make sure our taxpayer dollars are going where they belong, into real research, not into the pockets of university administrators. This is about more than just money, it's about ensuring a brighter, more efficient future for all of us. Thanks for watching, Patriots. If you agree with me, hit that like button, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more content that speaks truth to power. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and stay patriotic.